I had a look at your chart. Are you okay with humor?
No, yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
great. Because
All day long.
okay. Well, no, I just looked at your chart, and it was like, you came into this life with what I would call a spiritual PhD program, and
Yeah.
except no,
Yeah.
except nobody told you that you enrolled in this where there's no syllabus, and the professor is apparently the universe itself,
Yes.
with a twisted
Yes.
sense of humor. Um,
Absolutely.
because I'm in a sense, what I'm aiming to do is to debunk some of the very serious, aspects of astrology, especially in evolutionary astrology, when you talk about Saturn returns and Pluto and
Oh
Aquarius.
yeah.
So
I'm
people
in
get,
my Saturn return, so I'm all
yeah, but people
game to
get
talk
very
about
heavy
that.
about it, and
Yeah.
I wanted to try and, I mean, I'm not the greatest, comedic fan. I'm not, but I think what I'm trying to do is inject some humor into readings, because I think that when you're talking about these things, um, it's, if you're talking about the wounded healer, people go, "Oh my God, I'm a wounded healer." So that they go from perception to story to conclusion in a nanosecond. I don't want them to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, I try to be very funny with my stuff too because the work I do is so heavy that you have to
Yeah,
have fun or else
yeah,
you're not going to be able to thank you, baby.
yeah.
So,
Well,
um
and also, humor is a great disinfectant because it allows
yeah,
people to be much more open and to receive things in a much more and then it's much more, it's easily accessible rather than, yeah, because I,
it
I
breaks
listen
down with this.
I listen to some astrologers, and they go, "Oh, it's your Saturn return, and Saturn's is the limiter, and Pluto moving into Aquarius. We're looking at martial turbulence and really dark. It's like, yeah, okay, I get that, and we've always gone through dark times as a species, not this planet. I think it's just a question of how we transmit that.
Well, my first Saturn return, I blew up my whole life.
I'm not surprised. Um, I was just looking at your chart, and I saw that what I would call the great restructuring, because you had Saturn in Taurus in your eighth house, which is basically saying, congrats, you've won the lottery of having to completely reconstruct your entire relationship with money, power, and self worth all at the same time. Right. And so this wasn't your garden variety quarter life crisis where you just dye your hair or buy a motorcycle. This was more like the universe handing you a demolition crew and said, everything you thought you knew about your value, yeah, we're going to tear that down and start over. Because the eighth house doesn't mess around. It's like, the Marie Kondo. I don't know if you've heard of Marie Kondo. The tidying expert. She was a star of the Netflix show Tidying
Yeah.
Up with Marie. Yeah, so it's like the Marie Kondo, right, of the zodiac. So instead of asking if things spark joy, it's asking you, can you spark your soul's evolution?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it was ugly.
Yeah. Well,
I I I just leveled everything. I divorced my husband, I sold my house, I sold my business, and I moved out of state to live with a bunch of people I met at the Renaissance Fair. And my former business partner said, "You ran off and joined the circus." And I was like, "Yeah, you're not wrong." You know,
well,
like,
if you look back to that time, I would say, can you laugh about how the universe basically said, "Hey, hold my beer," and then proceeded to restructure your entire life. And then, I mean, did you ever have one of those moments where you looked around and thought, "Hmm, this is either a cosmic joke, or I'm supposed to learn something really important here."
at the time, no, but later, yes. So yeah, and within a few years after that, I also went through a major foundational deconstruction.
Ah,
So like I just tore out the foundation of everything I believed to be true about myself, and I walked around for 3 weeks completely ungrounded. and where all of my rote processes ceased to function. And so I would literally get out of the shower with shampoo still in my hair. I would run into doorways as I was walking through because I didn't know where my edges were. I was unsafe to drive. I did not drive during that time. I was like airheaded, and that was the antithesis of who I was at the time, airhead. I was like Miss Serious, and I just sat there and waited for the foundation to recoalesce underneath me. And when I looked, some of the things that had been the cornerstone of what I thought was my identity were not in the foundation anymore. The need to do everything perfectly. Some of I don't remember what the other pieces were, but that one was a shocker, right? That had been a cornerstone. Like, do everything to the best of your ability, da 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 da. And it was just not there. And I was like, I guess I did give myself to be human.
Well, I'd imagine you discovered some gifts that actually had a monetary value, and I was wondering, was it a gradual realization of more of a, hey, wait, people will pay me for this moment?
Well, so my mother raised me in the New Age movement from the time I was 5. So I was studying Seth and Ram Dass and Abraham Hicks and J.C. Knight and psychic development skills and metaphysics and all that stuff from as far back, and some personal growth and everything from as far back as I can remember.
Were you a landmark girl?
My mother brought home Est,
which
was the precursor to Landmark, the not kind of gentler version, right? With Werner Erhard himself.
Oh, wow. Right.
Yeah, she brought that home when I was 6, right? So, yes. And then, so when time came, when I was 28 and I had my Saturn return and I went through this leveling of my life, right? I also came back into spirituality because when I had married my husband, he was an atheist. And so I sort of pulled away from spirituality for a while. And I came back into it with a vengeance, right? So I got my Reiki certification. I got my Shiatsu certification. I was going to a spiritualist church where they did mediumship from the pulpit and all of the things, right? And so what was happening is my psychic gifts were opening up widely, right? And I started channeling, and I was getting information for people. So people would be getting messages at the church, and I would get additional information. I would grab them at the coffee clutch and say, hey, just for what it's worth, I got this while you were getting your message, and things like that. And so, there was all of that going on. And so I thought about selling my services as a healer and as a psychic. For a long time, I was doing just small bits and pieces here and there, right? It wasn't until, I want to say like 2006. So this all started in 98. And so it wasn't until about 2006 that I really started working with people at this level, doing this type of work that I do now, which is the full energy meets personal growth, energy evolution meets personal growth, to create that full transformational experience, right? I was doing coaching in the mid 90s for real estate agents, but I wasn't doing the energy side of it. I didn't come out of the energetic closet until like 2005, right? And
did you have to have awkward conversations with yourself about actually charging for what you're worth instead of just working for exposure and good vibes?
So I did a lot of practice. So there's a stage in your spiritual evolution where you go through it, and I call it the prove it stage. It's also the spiritual addiction stage, right? Where you're like trying to absorb every piece of spiritual information you could possibly get hold of to try and figure out what and orient to the spiritual space, right? The prove it stage is about, so the stage before that is saying, okay, I acknowledge that this stuff works, right? And so that's the proof and proselytizing phase. It's the, holy crap, this stuff actually works. I must tell everyone I know and drag them out to classes with me so that they don't think I'm crazy, right? And then you transition into, okay, it works for other people. Other people can do it. Can I do it? And that's where you step into the prove it stage. And the prove it stage often comes with a huge amount of practice that you're doing for free, right? or for trade or, whatever, or discounted price. And I went through that stage too, right? You typically, there's a place where you have this moment where you cannot convince yourself it was by accident that you did this. And so for me, that day came when a friend of mine at the Spiritualist Church said, "Oh my God, can you teach a class for me? The person who was supposed to teach tonight quit, canceled, they're sick and they can't do it. Can you teach a class on anything for 2 hours?" I was like, "Well, I'm taking a shiatsu class right now. I could teach what I know about shiatsu." And he was like, "Great, fabulous, just show up." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." I'd never taught a 2-hour class before. I had no idea how much time or stuff I needed to have for that. And so I taught everything I knew about shiatsu in an hour and a half, and then was like, "That's all I know." Like, I didn't have time to prep for this. And he said, "Well, why don't you just do readings for people?" And, if I had had my cards with me, 'cause I've been reading tarot cards since I was 12, right? If I had had my cards with me, I'd have been fine with that. But I didn't have my cards with me. And I said, no, I don't do this. And he's like, "No, you do this all the time. I see you do this at the coffee class. You've done this with me at lunch. You do this all the time." And I'm like, "I don't do this." And I'm like, "I don't have my cards. I don't have it." He's like, "You don't need your cards." And I'm like, "But I need my crutch, right? I need it." Right? And he was like, "No, you don't." And I said, I finally I was like, and everybody in the room was like, "Ooh, yeah, we want that." And I was like, "Oh, God." And I finally said, "Okay, here's the deal. I will do this with the understanding that everything that comes out of my mouth is probably wrong." And they said, "Okay." And it gave me permission to just say whatever it was because I'd already said it's probably wrong. And they already agreed it's probably wrong. I'm like, okay, so I don't have to be right. Right. And I came out with stuff that I had no business knowing. Well, I was like, I kept looking for ways that I might have picked it up because I did not know any of the people in the room except for my friend. And I kept trying to figure out if I had picked up on things from just physical cues or whatever. I was like, there has to be something that I just picked this up. And there was nothing. It was, there was one woman in the room who was terrified to get a reading, but desperately wanted one. Right. And so every time I got something wrong, she would say, "That one's mine." So like I was reading one woman and I was like, and I was like, I don't know. I'm keep getting two different things. I get boys, 7 and 9, and then and she goes, "Yeah, that's me." And then I get twin boys who are 19, and the woman who was terrified, "Those are mine." And I'm like, "Okay, you're going camping with the boys." And she's like, "Yeah." I said, to Niagara Falls, and she's like, "No." And the other woman's, "We're going to Niagara." And I'm like, she just kept inserting her energy into the other woman's reading. So everything I got wrong for this woman was the other woman's, right? And
Oh, wow.
and so it was really funny. And there was one guy I couldn't read at all. And he was just like, "Do not judge your abilities based on me." He said, "I've been to world-class psychics who cannot read me." He said, "Don't." And I went, "Huh, I wonder why that is." And Spirit took me back to when he was 5 years old. And they said, "Okay, this is why. And this is how he constructed it." And da, da, da. I was like, "Okay, so when you were 5, you constructed this shield that is the thing that keeps people from being able to read you right now. And this is how you constructed it. So if you ever want to take it down, this is how you could deconstruct it." And he was just flabbergasted. He was like, "Nobody's ever given me anything." So basically what it came down to is I just was like, there was no way I could convince myself that I wasn't psychic by the end of this call. No, by the end of the class rather. And so, that was that moment where I was like, "Yep, I'm psychic. I can't deny it." Right. And that was my prove it phase. Right. And then, there's just other things. It's like, okay, I'm psychic, but am I a medium? Okay, I'm a medium, but am I a channel? Okay, I'm a channel, but, am I, this is like every single thing you do, you have to prove to yourself you can do it. And then at some point, and this happened much later, somewhere in about my 40s, I would open my mouth and pearls of wisdom would drop out. And I would go, "Well, damn, that was wise." Like, and it's just this weird moment where it just transitioned. And I was like, I was shocked, right? I would say things, I'd be like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" Right. And at this point now, 10, 15 years later, I am now at the stage where I just channel whatever I need, right? And I have full faith that whatever it is channeled properly. And I don't have to prove to myself anything anymore. I just know that what I'm doing is the right thing to do. And if it's not working, it's not because I'm suck at it. It's because I'm not taking the right approach, and let me try a different approach or whatever, right? It's just there's no internal judgment going on around it anymore, which it takes a while. You got to practice and
Sure.
practice and practice to get to the
Yeah.
point where the self-judgment goes away, right? And I started charging for it long before the self-judgment went away. And nobody complained about the services, so I figured that was okay. I was going to prove to them faster than I was going to prove to me, and okay, fine, right? But when you have that, you undercharge, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that happens a lot now. And nobody's raising their prices, which is really obnoxious, or a lot of people aren't. In 2000, I was getting $60 for a reading. And I know people who charge $60 today. Then the price differential for inflation is insane. It's the equivalent of having charged like $30 for a reading back then. You're getting half the amount of money that you got before, right? So there's a lot of stuff in the industry that's a challenge in that way, because people are just they're trading validation instead of money.
Well, yeah, you're you're like a spiritual alchemist with a good business plan. You're you're one of those. You've got your Scorpio sun, your sun in Scorpio in the second house, and you're not one of those Scorpios who transforms just for the drama of it. But I want to be honest, is that there's probably been some drama around, some drama along the way. You're not.
Yeah.
You're When I was looking at your chart, I was thinking, this is a life. This is a Scorpio sun who looks at life's garbage pile and thinks, I bet I can turn this into gold and maybe start an LLC while I'm at it. So your identity built around being the person who can handle what others can't, who can dive into the psychological deep end without floaties, and somehow come back with treasures that people will literally pay good money for. Okay, how do you explain to people that your idea of fun is diving into the psychological depths that most people avoid with a 10-foot pole?
Well, I tell people I'm a Scorpio with a Cancer moon and a Libra rising. And so I dive into the deep mucks of the darkness within, and I love you like a mother until you come out the other side a fully balanced human, right? That's the way I explain it. Yeah.
Have you
I
had
live for that stuff.
well, yeah, I can see that. Have you had that experience where someone shares their deepest trauma and you're thinking, oh, this is Tuesday for me?
Um, I don't know that I think of it that way, but I often that response often comes to me more from when people come to me and say this weird thing is happening to me energetically, and I'm talking to this entity that I don't know, or I'm not human or whatever, and they're like, I'm gonna freak you out, and I'm gonna, you're gonna think I'm crazy, and I'm like, oh honey. Like, I get, I have things crazier than this every day in my life. It's like, you're fine. We're good. We got this, right? I get that response more often that way. When people are going into their trauma, I'm traveling with them. And so I never have that kind of reaction, because I'm in it and I'm feeling it with them. And the significance of it is, because it's significant to them, it is significant to me because I'm in it with them, right? So in trauma, I don't have that kind of response, right? I am confident in my abilities to manage, but I don't have the, oh honey, right? It's not that sort of thing. It's I'm in it with them, and I'm holding the container for it in reverence. And if I held that energy with it, would be totally dissonant, and it would make the container unsafe, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And like you rightly said, you've got your moon in Cancer in the 10th house, which is what I would call the public nurturer. And I kind of smiled to myself when I saw that, because it's like, I thought, what would the universe say? Oh, it's saying, well, you know what this deeply private, emotionally sensitive person needs to have their feelings be their career. So it's like, I kind of saw you as a professional hugger, except the hugs are emotional. And sometimes people cry, and sometimes this becomes, your, I don't know if you got LinkedIn, it can become your LinkedIn headline, because you're meant to be known
I need
publicly.
to stop you. I need to stop you because you just closed a circle for me in my life from 15 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I've got massive chills happening right now. So I need to stop you because I have to tell you the story, because that's why I did this, because you just closed the circle in my life. So I think it was 15 years ago, might have been longer. I was sitting with a friend of mine in Starbucks, and I'd been getting the message over and over again from the universe: be who you are. That was just the message that was coming over and over and over and over and over again. And in my head, I don't know if you know who Amachi is. She's known as the hugging saint. And she
Ah,
literally just travels around the world hugging people, and people stand in line for hours and hours to get a hug from her, right? And she has all these devotees who travel with her all over the world and take care of her and manage the room and do the sales of the stuff and whatever, right? And I had just been to see her. I had not had a great experience, honestly. I didn't like it. But I had been in that space, and I was looking for how to monetize my life. So no, I think it was longer than 15 years ago. Anyway, it was a while ago. And and I was sitting with my friend, and somehow in my head, be who you are had become be Amachi. And you just said, I see you hugging the world, but doing it on an emotional level. And I never made that transition in that whole time of having that conversation with my friend in Starbucks, because I'm sitting there for, I swear to you, this must have been the 30th time that we had had this same conversation. Be who you are, be who you are. I'm not Amachi. I don't know what about. And it was like, it never occurred to me that be who you are and be Amachi was not the same thing. But I didn't make the transition to the emotional side of it. And so you just closed that loop for me. But the funny piece about it, and the universe was trying to tell me, and I didn't get it. But I'm sitting there with my friend, and this woman I know from festivals came into Starbucks, and I was like, "Oh my God, what happened to you?" Because I looked at her, and her energy was totally hosed. I mean, it was just bad, right? And I walked up to her, I'm like, what happened to you? She's like, oh no, I've been to the doctor, I've been to several specialists, and I can't figure it out. And something's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, your energy field is fucked. And she's just like, oh, and I said, stand still and I'll fix it. And she's like, okay. And then, I shoved her back into her body, and I healed up the stuff that was all wrong, and I got her grounded again. And it took me like 3 minutes, right? In the middle of Starbucks. And then I sent her off to get her coffee, right? And I went back to my friend, and I sat down, and I was like, be who you are. I can't be Amachi. But I went right back to my stuff, right? And this woman walks up, having gotten her coffee, into the middle of this conversation, and she looks at me, she says, have you met you? And I'm like, what? She said, I just told you I went to a doctor, I went to 2 specialists. Nobody knew what was wrong with me. Nobody could even say there was something wrong with me. And you took one look at me, and in the moment you saw me, you knew, one, there was something wrong with me, two, what it was, and in 3 minutes you fixed it. Have you met you? And I went, uh, okay, but that's just what I do. Like, which is another thing that happens to a lot of people in this industry, is that they're like, well, it's easy for me, so it doesn't count, right? And but even then, I was like, okay, so I'm a healer. Yeah, I knew that about me, right? But I still didn't. I'm like, but what does that mean? What do I do with it? I don't know, right? And you just used exactly the words to close that loop for me, so that I now, because I never got it, right? I never got it. I came into this space. I ended up doing what I'm doing, which is what I'm meant to be doing, but I never got what that be who you are thing was at that level until just this moment. So thank you for that.
Beautiful. Well, I'm glad because you're meant to be publicly known as the person who makes everyone feel like they just got a warm cookie from their grandmother. But you you probably spent years thinking, oh wait, my feelings are supposed to be my job. How does this even work on a tax return?
Thank you. Yes, exactly.
Right?
That was the exact conversation we were having. Yeah.
How did you wrap your head around the idea that what I would call your emotional superpowers were actually meant to be your career, your vocation, not just something that made you cry during commercials?
So, so I was going where my soul was taking me, right? And so I was teaching small classes, I was doing healing sessions, whatever, whatever. It became clear to me at some point in like the early 2000s, that I carried the energy of change, and that I started to define myself as the eye of the storm, right? The
Mm.
storm raged all around me, but I was choosing to be the eye so that I didn't have to have my life fall into shambles every 30 seconds because I was living in the energy of change, right? And that eventually evolved into I am the transformation event horizon and the initiatrix that opens the door to initiation, right? And that is where I stand today. I am the transformation event horizon. I open the door and I prep you for the journey, but you have to decide you want to walk through. I have no attachment to whether or not you walk through. That is codependent, and I'm not doing that, right? But I will hold the door open for so long as you are interested in walking through, right? And that energy has consequences in my life, right? So the hints about it, somebody just asked me about this yesterday. So it's so interesting that you said that. Um, and it's so funny because I talk to my clients, you said energetic soup. And I talk to my clients all the time. You got to sit in the soup of your emotions to process them, right? That's
Mm.
literally the language I use. So you are tapped right in. Um, and so the way that it showed up is that people would come and be super involved with me and like really intensely friends with me and all this stuff, and then they would just disappear from my life for like 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, then come back and be like, okay, I'm ready for my next level. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh well, I got to the point where I just couldn't grow anymore, so I had to take a break from you. And I was like, oh, okay. That's how I figured it out, because I
Ah,
wasn't trying to coach them, right? I wasn't, and I would have people come up to me years after having been at a party together and say, "You said this random thing to me at a party, and it changed my whole life." And I'm like, one, I don't remember the party. Two, I don't remember the conversation. What did I say? And they'd say, "You said this," and I'm like, well, that sounds like me, but I know I wasn't trying to change your life. It was a party. I was just hanging out and chatting. But yeah.
you sound like you've mastered the art of being publicly nurturing, but you're still while still maintaining some semblance of emotional boundaries. Or are you still trying to figure that magic trick out?
No, the boundary thing was super important, and I actually the universe sent me on Walkabout to learn that one. So in 2002, I ended up on Walkabout. I was homeless, literally. I tried to get an apartment. I could not get approved. I tried to get a roommate situation. No one would take me. I literally ended up going from I was running a teaching circle at the time, and so I would stay at a different student's house each night of the week. And and that went on for like 6 months because I kept applying and I kept applying and I couldn't get in and couldn't get in. And it was just like, what? I'm a good person. My credit score is good. What is the problem, right? And so the ultimately I went to one of my students' houses and opened up one of their bathroom books and to a random page, and it said the apprentice shaman just before they go on his final vision quest will give away everything he owns, and for his final initiation as a shaman. And I had just scheduled the giving away of everything I owned in my storage unit because I was like, well, I don't know why I'm bothering to pay for this because clearly I'm not going to be allowed to get a house. And so I had literally just scheduled the giveaway the day before. And so I was like, oh crap, right? And so, I ended up being drawn to this festival, and that started the active part of the walkabout. And I spent another 6 months on the road learning that and debunking some of my beliefs, right? So I had, from having been a military kid, my mother always encouraged me to not look back and always to look forward. And so I never kept in touch with anybody when we left. And so in my head, somehow that had worked out to be, I must be a bad person. And when I leave, they discover I'm a bad person, so I can't go back. Somehow in my head, that belief structure was there, which didn't make any sense, but that's what it was. And so when I was on Walkabout, I was drawn back to some of the places again and was shocked, I tell you, to find out that people were happy to see me. Okay. And so I got to debunk that. But I also, because I was going different places every single day, sometimes I'd stay someplace for as much as 2 weeks, but never more than that. I learned what was me and what was not me. Because as an empath, it's very hard to know where you end and other people begin because you mix your energies with other people. And so I learned that process during the walkabout. And then later on, this beautiful woman at a wellness, wellness event, right, had told me about this process of pulling in your energy field and how you do that and to create solid boundaries. And I now give that process away on my website. It's called Boundaries for Empaths because she gifted it to me, so I gift it to everybody else because it was life changing, right? And that gave me really solid boundaries. And it's to the point now where I have really good control over how I do that. In fact, the last time I did a live event, it was at Soul Treat in 2021. And a woman walked up to me after the end of the event and she said, "You have the best boundaries I've ever seen." She said, "When you were speaking, your boundaries were wide open and you were inviting everybody in. But when you were watching somebody else from the back of the room, your boundaries were completely closed and you weren't drawing focus or attention. You were just being present to the person presenting. When you were on a panel, you were in between." She said, "You have such granular control over your boundaries. It's really impressive." And it's just years and years of practice, right?
Mm.
So, yeah, but absolutely necessary. And that's actually one of the things that I teach people because it's so crucial, especially when you're working with other people, to not get your energy involved in their field, right? And there's, yeah, as an energy worker, as a coach, as a spiritual coach, as a healer, it's super important to know exactly how to manage your own boundaries because otherwise you put yourself at risk and you risk putting your crap into your client's energy field.
So interesting because you've got Libra rising in your chart in the first house. So this is the what I would call the harmonious revolutionary. And there's this cosmic traffic jam of Venus and Jupiter, Mercury and Uranus all partying together in your first house. So it's like the image I get. It's like a walking Pinterest board of harmony and balance. Except plot twist, you're also secretly, I would contend, you're also secretly a relationship revolutionary. People probably meet you and think, "Oh, how lovely, a peacekeeper," and then 5 minutes later, you're casually dismantling their entire approach to partnerships with a gentle precision of a diplomatic ninja. And Uranus in the mix means that you're not only bringing balance, you're bringing you're bringing balance with a side of something. I'm not quite sure what it is, but
Empowerment.
empowerment. That's it. Yes, that's what I was looking for. Have
Yeah.
you considered that everything you think you know about relationships might be completely wrong?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I haven't considered that, but I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about relationships either. So, um,
Interesting.
but I'm happy to engage the opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, I have done relationships very differently in my life, and in variety of different ways depending upon my partner. So, um, you know, it's so funny that you said when you were talking. I'm going to go back to one dating experience from during the time in between my two marriages. I actually had long conversations with this guy on the phone, like hours and hours and hours. We had to have spent like 10, 15, 20 hours together on the phone. And then we met for the first time at a restaurant. And he made some sort of comment about having been a failure in his life and blah, blah, blah. And I looked at him and I said, that's not how I see it. I said, you've told me a bunch of stories, and the only times you've ever failed is when you were doing things that you didn't want to do that other people were pushing you into. Said you have been successful at everything you've ever done that you wanted to do. And I watched his brain go, whir, click, reboot. And I watched him like, yeah, I could just see his brain recategorizing his entire life. And and I knew in that moment that we were not dating anymore, that I was here entirely for this experience. This was a soul contract that we were here to have, and that this would be the last time we talked to each other. And he started going, and, uh, but, and I'm like, don't try to talk. Your brain is recalculating. I'm ordering dessert and you're paying for dinner. And he was like, and he just sat there for like 15, 20 minutes with his brain just like restructuring the whole time.
Mm.
And so, that experience was there. But in terms of me and my personal relationships, it's very funny because I have had a wide swath of relationship formats in my life. I'm bisexual, so I've had relationships with men and with women. I have been in polyamorous relationships. I have been in negotiably open relationships. I have been in fully monogamous relationships. I have been in, thruples. You name it. I've been in a wide variety of things. And a friend of mine actually wanted me to come and speak at Endless Poly Summer because she was like, we need to hear the words of somebody who isn't just defining themselves in one way, but in fact chooses a path based on the relationship that they're in, right? And I was like, yeah, but I'm in a monogamous relationship, and if I show up at Endless Poly Summer, people are going to hit on me. I'm like, I don't think so.
Do people ever get whiplash from your ability to be simultaneously the most harmonious person in the room and the one who's completely revolutionizing how you think about or how they think about relationships?
Probably. I told somebody yesterday on a discovery call that coming and spending time one on one with me is an intense experience, right? Because and it's not because I try to make it intense, and the only reason I say that because it's not intense for me is that people tell me it's an intense experience, right?
It's your nature.
And yeah, and I'm fully present,
Hmm.
and I'm with them and wherever they are, and whatever shows up, I give voice to it, right? And most people aren't even heard or noticed in today's culture. People have their face in their phones 90% of the time, 99% of the time, and they're just not present to other people. And so to come someplace where somebody is fully present to you, not only present, but intuitively open and energetically connected to be able to do that. Like right now, I feel you when you're saying things. Like when you were looking for the word, I could feel you in my energy field looking for the word, right? I could feel your energy. And so, that's the level. I mean, you're doing right now what I do with other people, right? You're just doing it at a different for different purposes, right? Yeah, for the different
Oh,
intent.
yeah. Well, I love your Uranian energy, how it secretly plots to shake up the entire dynamic. Um,
I am a little bit of a disruptor, yes.
yeah, I can see that. And have you perfected the art of delivering truth bombs with such grace and proportion that people thank you for it afterwards?
Yes, but it took me 25 years. So So in my childhood, I was very good at the truth bomb thing because I could see people. My cousin said I was a scary kid. Now my cousin's 7 years older than me, and she was like, "You were a scary kid." I was like, "What do you mean I was a scary kid?" She said, "You would just sit and stare at me." She said, "I felt like you were looking through me, like you were just watching everything I did." I said, "Well, that's exactly what I was doing." My grandmother, our grandmother had set her up to be like the person to be, and so I was trying to study her to be her, right? And but I just was very quiet. I was a very quiet child initially, and I would just take it all in and just take it all in, and I was always in the room with the adults because oftentimes it was just me and mom, right? So her favorite song for us was "You and Me Against the World," right?
Mm.
And so I started off like that, and in my teen years, I was a very angry child. And so my truth bombs would be designed to shock and awe, shock and
Yeah.
awe, right? Put people off balance so that I felt like I had the power position, right? And and then, over time, when I became more solid and felt more safe in myself, I didn't need to do it that way anymore, right? And so then it evolved into, okay, you're pushing my buttons because I didn't do it anymore, right? I would give it to people softly but I wouldn't truth bomb, right? And then they would only get it if they pushed my buttons and crossed my boundaries, pushed my buttons, crossed my boundaries. They had like 6 warnings, and then I would go and I just landed on their heads. And it would be exactly the way I'd done it before, but they got a lot of warnings beforehand, right? And now I don't. It's not a bomb so much as it is a balm, right?
Mm.
It's a okay. I want you to look at this a little differently, right? You're looking at it from this perspective. If we look at this and that and that and that, and we put them all together, it means this. And look at it this
Mm.
way, and they go. So I have a client of mine who I tend to evidently, and I didn't realize this until she told me. Right before I do that, I say, so the thing is, and she came out. I said, so the thing is, she's like, oh, good. I love when you say the thing is, because I know it's going to be the thing I need to hear. And I'm like, oh, I had no idea I prefaced it that way. But they get the warning of, so the thing is, and then they get the whatever it is. But
Mm.
by that time, my clients are ready to receive it, right? I've gotten to the point where I don't give things to people unless I feel like they are ready to receive them.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
a friend of mine pointed out to me years ago, if you try to give somebody something that they're not ready to receive, you actually inoculate them against ever receiving it in the future.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, so I'm doing damage. I'm not actually helping. So I will, yeah.
Well, if they're in
I,
denial, good luck in trying to, pour any kind of wisdom into their cup that's already full of denial. There's no space
yeah.
for it.
Yeah. Well, and I spoke to a guy on a podcast a few months ago, and he travels in very wealthy circles with guys who are doing big business all the time and whatever. And he said, what about this group of people? He said, these people need spirituality more than anybody. And I said, and he tapped into the energy of the room as he said it. And I was like, yeah, most of those guys aren't my clients. And he's like, what? I said, they're not ready.
Hmm.
And I said, there's a few people in that room that are ready, but not most of them. And he said, you know what? You're right. That's true. They're not. And, that you have to be ready.
Absolutely. Do you ever feel like you're running a diplomatic academy for people who didn't know they enrolled?
Diplomatic Academy. That's really funny. So I have to. So when I used to sell real estate years ago, right? And I was in my early 20s at the time, and I was a spitfire, and I just would like plow through any obstacles there were. And sometimes those obstacles were people, and so I would plow through people, right? And I was actually known as the tactless wonder, right? I would make sales, but I had zero tact, right? And at the end of my real estate sales career in that space, um, I actually had a client tell me that I was the most diplomatic person she'd ever met. And I was floored. I almost fell out of my chair when she said it. I'm like, what? Because 6 years ago, I was known as the tactless wonder, but real estate taught me how to be diplomatic because I had to continue relationships with these people who I was trying to plow through, right? If I plowed through them on this deal, they'd screw me over on the next one, right? And so I would, or deny me the next one, right? Because I'm a misery to work with, right? So, I learned how to be diplomatic there, and so the idea of me teaching diplomacy is it's really funny to me. But the so I think that you're not wrong though, because what I'm doing is I'm taking people who have been traumatized and have a lot of triggers that make them not diplomatic, and I'm healing those traumas and removing those triggers, or I'm helping them to do that. I'm not doing it, they're doing it, but I'm facilitating the process, and in doing so they become more diplomatic. So you're not wrong. It's just not how I've looked at it. So
It's what you're. It's I'm only interpreting. I'm measuring and interpreting your chart, and intuitively, yes, there's a symbolic language of it all. But I'm trying to bring from how I'm measuring it. I'm giving it interpretation through the lens of many different. It's almost kaleidoscopic. You turn it one way and you get different hues, different colors, different patterns. So this is sort of, it's pattern recognition in a way. It's very difficult for me to describe how it happens, but um, those are the words that just come to me.
yeah, I that's exactly what I do, is pattern recognition. So
Right.
that's what I tell people. I'm an engineer brain with a solid intuitive connection. And so I go up into the ethers and I take these really esoteric experiences and concepts and I bring them back down, and my
Mm,
engineer brain sorts and categorizes and structures and makes it easy to understand when I share it with people. So I'm
mm.
a teacher, but I'm a pattern recognizer and a healer and an engineer brain and all of the things. So that's exactly it.
No, thank you.
So
You just clothed it for me in a way that I can understand it. Sometimes it's very challenging to try and you know, go into my neighborhood of the brain, and you just hit a cul-de-sac, and you think, maybe that's there for a reason. Um, but looking again at your chart, your North Node, this is the intuitive healer's path, because your North Node is in Pisces in the sixth house. This is like the GPS for your soul. So, except instead of turn right, it's in 500 feet. It's saying trust your psychic hits and make them into a plan, because you're evolving from your south node in Virgo energy, which is basically you being the cosmic quality control manager, checking everyone's work, making sure all the details are perfect. But
I used to call myself the OSHA inspector. So you're not wrong. Try to keep everybody safe.
exactly. But um, but now I what I'm seeing is that the universe is asking you to trade in your clipboard for a crystal ball and somehow make this into a sustainable daily practice. So it's like being asked to run a very spiritual, very intuitive Jiffy Lube for people's souls. And so, um, how has your relationship with perfectionism evolved from everything must be exactly right to maybe the magic happens in the messy spaces?
Yeah, so that has been a really big evolution in my personal life, right? So perfectionism is a function of two things. It's about feeling like you're not safe, and that you have to be of value to be safe and to have worth. You know, you have to be right, you have to be perfect, you have to do more than everybody else to be half as good. You know, it's all of that, right? And so, you know, I told you about the cornerstone of the perfectionism being left out in 2003 or something, 2002, 2001 maybe. And but the engineer brain was still trying to overly structure, right? I literally had a conversation this morning with my friend Kathy, who runs some of my programs with me, and we were talking about my psychic mastery mentorship program and the structure of it and how we were going to do it and things like that, because we're launching that in June. And she was saying, you know, I feel like you're trying to structure this too fast and you're trying to go from the top down instead of the bottom up. And, you know, she shifted the way I was thinking about it. And so yesterday we had done a closing call for one of my programs that was completing. And the part of the closing call was a ritual we did where we were looking for whatever our intention was. And my intention was to see where the next stage was, because I'm in my Saturn return and I'm doing a massive up leveling of identity and a lot of other pieces. And I went looking, and normally I can look ahead in my own life and my guides will show me and whatever. And I looked ahead and there was this white glowing wall, and I could tell there was a door in it, but the door was not open. And they're like, nope, you are not going to see past this, because if we let you see past it, you're going to fuck it up. And I was like, what? They literally said that to me. I'm like, and then they gave me distractions everywhere in my house. The housekeeper came through, she turned on the vacuum cleaner, my husband came through, brought in the groceries, the dogs got crazy. I was just like, just 4 minutes we were in this, 4 freaking minutes, and all of this happened in that 4-minute time frame. And there was no place in the house I could go to get away from it, because, you know, she was cleaning everywhere, and I was just like, oh my God, right? And so, you know, there was this distraction, right? I have done better at being, my practice for the last year has been being in trust with the universe, right? That has been the way I've stepped out of the need to structure, hold, right? And I'm doing significantly better than I used to on that. And as I lean into that, that works. And then the retreats that I've been running have also reflected that. It was very interesting because I ran a retreat for the first retreat I've run in 4 years, 4 years, in November last year. And it poured rain the whole time. I mean, it was terrible. It was like there were landslides happening everywhere. Roads were closed, whatever. And I was like, oh my God, you know, they didn't get to do the big Volcano Peru tour because there was no way to get up there because of the landslides and everything. And they all had the best experience ever, right? They came out massively transformed. And what I had gone in with, so there are multiple types of retreats that you can run, right? The massive transformational retreats that we have run in the past have been these fully scripted experiences where you go through a process. You do workshops to get you ready to go through this transformative ritual, to get you ready to have your integrative space, and then more getting ready and do the second ritual to complete the transformation. And then, you know, there's a whole process, right? It's a 5-day experience on the land. You never leave the land. Nobody comes on. It's a fully contained environment, you know, blah, 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 right? Massively transformational, also massively confronting, right? And that has been what I have known to be a massively transformational experience up until now. What I ran in November was an intuitively based experience. And so I provided the structure of, we're going to meet for 3 hours a day and do some piece of education. Do not get attached to what that education is. I will call what I feel called to do, I will do. And then we will have a ritual every day of some kind. And in my head, I was like, okay, I'm just going to do a bunch of different rituals. We'll do different things every day, and they'll get an experience of what these rituals are, because the experience, the program was called Adventures in Energetics. I was just exposing them to different rituals in my head. What was actually happening, because I'm me, is they were having a transformational experience that was being bolstered by the rituals that I was just intuitively deciding in the moment, oh, I'm going to do this one now, and I'm going to do that one now. And I just showed up and did the ritual in whatever energy was coming through in the moment in my intuitive self. And it was exactly what they needed every time. And I don't know why I was surprised, because I have had this experience every time I've done anything, but I was surprised. And, they all had this incredibly transformative experience, and they came out the other side feeling completely different, and they came home and it's sustained. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to a retreat. Most retreats, the experience ends after about a month. The afterglow fades after about a month. It is May, end of May, and they are still in it from November. So it is a transformation that has stuck. And so that's how I've transitioned, right? As I've gone from, fully structured and formatted and tapping into the energetic to understand how to do the formatting, and then creating the formatting and doing that. There was always, in the original version, there was always an insert miracle here portion where we weren't sure what was going to happen, but we knew it would show up in the moment, right? But it was one moment in the entire structured, like there were pages of script for us to follow, right? It wasn't fully scripted, but it was fully structured, right?
So how do you explain to your practical Virgo side that yes, trusting your intuition is actually a legitimate business strategy?
So the Virgo side doesn't have a problem with that. It just needs to know that there's some structure, right? So that's why this particular version is better, because I know there's going to be 3 hours of education. I know there's going to be a ritual. I know that we're going to do a tour. I know that we're going to do a dinner or a breakfast together or whatever. I know I have a structure. So my Virgo is soothed, right? And then within that structure, which makes sense, right? Because the feminine energy of intuition needs to be held in the masculine container, right? And so the Virgo creates the container, and the intuition can live in the feminine self within that container and just be present in that space for whatever shows up, right? And so that's the balance, right? That's again the Libra balance.
Mm. And I want to just touch on your South Node, because I think there's something quite interesting here in terms of releasing the sacrificial helper. Because your South Node's in Virgo in the 12th house. And this is like having been the universe's unpaid intern for several lifetimes. They're the one who did all the detail work, making sure everything was perfect, worked behind the scenes until 3 a.m., and then watch someone else get the credit. And you came, from what I can intuit, is that you came into this lifetime already having your PhD in self-sacrifice and your master's degree in making yourself invisible while fixing everyone else's problems. So this 12th house placement means you're probably so behind the scenes that you're practically in a different dimension, organizing the cosmic filing cabinets while everyone else got to be in the spotlight. Can you laugh now about those years when your life motto was basically, I'll just fix everyone else's problems and somehow that will fix mine?
Yes, well, somewhat. So I remember the day I resigned as a bodhisattva. So and bodhisattva is exactly what you described, is I'm gonna be of service to everybody else until the planet is fully evolved. And I was like, yeah, this sucks. I'm done. Right. And I resigned my bodhisattva position. And yeah, there was this sense that for a long time, there was a sense that if I do this, then it'll come back around. I'm a super connector, right? And so every time I would go to a networking event, I would give value, give value, give value, give value, give value. And eventually I was exhausted, right? And I finally got to the point where I was like, here's my card. If you want this, then contact me, which cut down on the amount of value I had to provide by like 98%, because almost nobody would contact me. And so the amount of follow-up was significantly less after that. A sense of, and I actually told somebody that the other day. They were like, "Oh, let's get on a networking call," and I'm like, I don't really do a lot of networking calls anymore. And they're like, "Well, but why? How do you network? It's all about who you know." And I'm like, I know a ton of people, and thus far, very little of the people that I know and the very little of the time I've spent networking has ever resulted in business in my hand. And I just don't see the value in it anymore. And she was like, "Well, you're just not looking at it right." I'm like, "Honey, I looked at it exactly the way I used to teach networking," right? I'm like, I know networking, right? I was actually courted to be the head of the entrepreneur department for 2 different universities, because they were exposed to me through the networking stuff that I taught and the different things that I did in my community. But I did it right. Let me say, I did it right, and it just never really worked for me. And so, it's funny to hear you say that, because that actually puts a lot in perspective for me too. That's actually really helpful to know. So clearly it's evolving out of that. So, but yeah, there was this sense of I had this sense of building up credit in a bank account with all these people that I was talking to, and I wouldn't ask for anything unless I was absolutely sure I wanted it and could receive it and could accept it, and therefore I never asked, right? And so I, unless I was, talking about business or whatever, but the I was doing the classic undervaluing myself thing, because I teach this to my students all the time. I'm like, look, when you do something for somebody else, you think of it as a 50-cent deposit into their bank account. But when you ask for help from somebody else, you think of it as a $50,000 withdrawal. And that's wrong, right? So I've done a lot better. So I used to give an assignment to my students that they were to go to the grocery store and do their weekly grocery, not a small run, but their whole weekly grocery run, and never touch anything that they purchased from the time they walked in the door until the time they got home. And they had to get somebody else to put it in the cart, somebody else to put it on the thing, somebody else to take it to their car, all the things. And people would just flip out, right? And because I slipped and fell like 3 weeks ago, and I was completely incapacitated for 3 weeks. I literally left the house for the first time yesterday in 3 weeks. And my husband also was having bad carpal tunnel and a bad back, and so he couldn't drive for a while. And so we were in this position where if we were going to get anything done, we needed help. And so I just started calling our friends here. Now, I didn't call the same person for everything. I called different people, and I was like, I need you to, because his birthday party fell in the middle of this time, right? And our dog was in heat. And so, I mean, it was awful, right? And so I called a friend and said, I need you to pick up his birthday present. I called another friend and I said, can you come over early and help set the house, because we can't move the furniture around, because we were hosting the party at our house, right? And I didn't want him to miss out on his birthday party, right? And so, and then other friends stayed late and helped us reset the house. And then, we used paper plates and plastic forks, which other people picked up and purchased for us and brought to the party, right? And I just kept asking for help and asking for help and asking for help. And my friend pointed out to me, she said, you just did the grocery store exercise. She said, you did it with your whole life, but you did the grocery store exercise. And I was like, you're right, I did. And I didn't feel guilty about any of it, right? Because, I'm like, yeah, I do it for them and they'll do it for me and it'll be fine. And I didn't feel like it was a $50,000 withdrawal, right? It was just, we were friends, right? And so there's an evolution there, right? It just evolves over time, but you have to work it to do it. And, I've been doing this work hardcore for 28 years. And, I've been studying the stuff for 50. So it's, it takes time, but you get there,
That's a great exercise. And I was looking at your midheaven, which is I would call the professional mother healer, because your midheaven's in Cancer. which suggests that your professional calling is basically to be the person everybody wishes to be, their therapist, their mom, their best friend, and they could be all rolled into one, except that, you're getting paid for it and you have business cards, and this isn't about being maternal in the, let's pack your lunch sense, though you probably do that too. It's about being the person who creates a safe and brave emotional space that people feel comfortable enough to do their deep healing work. You're like an emotional safety coordinator. So instead of hard hats and safety vests, you're probably working with tissues and probably really good coffee or tea.
Yeah, and chocolate.
And chocolate. How do you explain to people that your job title is essentially the professional human heart whisperer?
Well, not nearly as well as you just did, but I've told people that I'm, part cheerleader, part drill sergeant, but that was a very old version of me. These days, I've had one of my clients call me Shaman Mama because I'm a shaman and mama, right? But I tell people, look, there is no growth without safety. And so I have really solid boundaries and really hardcore adherence to the rules within those boundaries, because if that space is not solidly held, then nothing happens, right? So if anybody gets abusive with anybody else, they get booted, and there is no second chance, period. That is just it, because otherwise the room is not safe, right? If you've got anger, you are welcome to bring it to me, and I'm happy to hold it for you, because that's my job. But anger directed at other people, not okay, because they're in a vulnerable space and you need to respect that they're in a vulnerable space. And if you have anger, you bring it to me and I'll help you work through it, right? And so that container is what allows everything to happen, because people are unsafe in their day-to-day life, right? And the day-to-day lack of safety is getting worse in the US on a regular basis because of all the stuff going around, right? And so people are feeling less and less safe. And so it's more and more important for that safety container to be held. And in fact, nobody gets into any of my programs without signing a confidentiality agreement so that we know that nobody's sharing anything outside of the group. All of this stuff is true, right? And that's paramount to the process. And so the piece here is, tell me what the question was again, because I was on a roll and then I lost it. What was your question? How do I don't know. You don't know
I was asking you about how do you explain that your job
Yes,
title
my
is
job
essentially
title.
the professional human heart whisperer?
Yeah. So I am what I don't really say it that way. Because what I do is more than just heart work, right?
Mm.
I'm doing work on every chakra, and I'm doing work on how they integrate into the universe itself, right? I am so especially in this new program that I'm doing, I've pre-enrolled some people in it, and what we're doing is we're learning the secrets of the universe, right? So we're learning magic. I'm handing people effectively the keys to a nuclear power plant in the energetic realm, because I'm not teaching them recipe magic. Like, here's the spell for this, here's a ritual for that, da da da. No, no, no. I'm teaching them how to be chefs. So I'm teaching them the science of the magic, right? It's like, this is how you understand how you do these things and how you formulate them so you can write your own spells and your own rituals, and you can learn how to do this stuff at a deep level the way that I do it, right? And so it's a much deeper experience. And so it's not just, we're going to evolve you as a person, we're also going to teach you how to be the ultimately powerful and creative being that you are, right? We are all incredibly powerful divine beings. And I'm just reminding people how to tap back into that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And you Chiron, the wounded healer, is in Aries in your seventh house. And it's like having been enrolled in the universe's assertiveness training from hell program. Um, except nobody told you that what was happening at the time.
Oh.
So you probably learned early, and I know you mentioned it, but you probably learned early on that being angry and demanding, or heaven forbid, having, needs was basically relationship suicide. So you became, I would imagine, you became the person who could negotiate world peace, but couldn't ask for extra pickles in your sandwich.
Yes.
So your healing journey has been about discovering that you can be both kind and have a backbone, and that you
Yes.
can be nurturing and take up space, and that
Yes.
healthy relationships actually require two people who both matter. Can you
Yes.
can you laugh now about all those years when you thought assertive was a four-letter word?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so funny because I was an incredibly shy child when I was very young. And of course, the military life had to basically beat that out of me because if I didn't go become more outgoing, I would never make any friends before we moved again. And so that was pushed. And then um, the I really avoided confrontation
Mm.
hard. I was terrified of confrontation because my dad was a rageaholic. So anybody getting angry was terrifying to me because I remember being like 3 years old and my dad was yelling at my mom, not even me, yelling at my mom. And I ran into the coat closet, closed the door, and pulled all the coats down on top of me to get away from the rage that was coming out of him. And it was terrifying to me to be around angry people. And so I avoided conflict like the plague, right? And then I became my angry teenage self and was like, no, I get to be the angry one. And I would just like spew all over everybody, right? And, but I never asked for anything that I felt vulnerable about. And I never shared anything that I felt vulnerable about because I didn't feel like I still, despite being the angry one, despite my warrior standing on my front porch going, bring it, right? Despite that, I never felt like I could protect myself, right? I would front with the warrior, but I still was the injured little child on the inside, desperately afraid somebody was going to hurt me. And so I would tell people things that would feel like they were vulnerable, but they were things that were not actually vulnerable to me. Right? They were things that I had already worked out and I was already done with, but I would never give them something that was actually vulnerable to me. And over the years, um, I have put the warrior in a box in the attic so that I'm not like drawing people to me to fight with, right? Because whatever's on your front porch is what you're going to resonate with and what you're going to draw to you. Law of attraction, right? And I don't feel the need to come have the warrior come bounding out of the attic and land on people's heads anymore. I am who I am, and it is what it is, and the vulnerability is what the vulnerability is. And I have learned to see vulnerability as strength, which is a very different way of looking at the world. Okay? And
Did
so,
did you feel
yeah.
did you feel that that when you asked for what you needed, did you feel that you were declaring war on everyone you loved?
Um, I could do it with my mom because my mom just wanted to give me everything, right? That was not a problem. So, but with everybody else around me, my value was based on what I provided. And so if I asked for something, again, it was that $50,000 withdrawal. It was like I was putting so much pressure on the relationship that I might crumble, right? That was sort of the sense of it. And it became very difficult, because I always had to be perfect, right? And so, letting go of the perfection helped a lot. I actually, it was so funny. I talked to a friend of mine who I was friends with during this. There was a 4-year period where before the walkabout where I was living in the magical house, right? Where there was a bunch of us who were all on a magical path who were all doing our deep healing work together in this 4-year period. And you know, I was having a really tough time. I was doing my work, but I was having a hard time, and I was really rough around the edges. And I talked to my friend, you know, 20 years later, who had been in that house with me, and I was like, "How did you ever put up with me? I was insufferable in so many ways." And she said, "You had other redeeming qualities." I was like, "Okay." But you know, you know, you just did the best you could, you
So
know,
did
and the
you
other
did
people
you
had problems too.
so did you have to teach people in your life that the new boundaried version of you is actually the upgrade, not malfunction?
Uh, well, so what happens when you put boundaries in place in your life for the first time is that a lot of people disappear because they were the takers of the world. And when you have no boundaries and you are finding your value through what you provide to others, you are attracting takers into relationship with you because they take from you and you get to feel good about yourself. That's the contract, right? And when you decide that no, you want to get something back for the stuff that you're giving, and that, you know, you would like a balanced friendship and not a taker relationship, then the takers go, oh, you're not in for this kind of relationship. Okay, I'm going to go find somebody else who is, right? They opt out because they don't like it. And then you're left going, I put all this energy into these relationships. What happened? It's like, well, you broke the contract and they left, right? No, it's no big surprise. But then you have a fallow period, and then new people come in, and then they expect to be in a balanced relationship, and so on. So yeah, there's pushback initially, but ultimately you up level. And over the course of my life, I have been through a wide swath of people, and you know, friend groups where, you know, we cycled together for a while and then we didn't. And that's just how it goes when you're on a hardcore spiritual growth path. You know, some people keep up and some people don't.
I want to address. Are you right for time, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
Actually, I want to add something to what I just said. Is
Yeah.
some people keep up and some people don't. But it's not just that, because as I said that, I was like, nope, that's also, there's other piece to it too, because that's true for some people. But for some other people, it's some people grow in the way that you're growing, and other people grow in different directions. And
Mm.
so even if they're keeping up in the pace of their growth, they may be going in a different direction, and so you part ways that way, right? Which is, it's not the same as what I said before, which is some people don't keep up, right? So I just wanted to clarify, because
Yeah.
that is true and the other is also true. Yeah.
And there's some major aspects that bring some dynamic tensions in your chart, and the aspects in your chart are like having a really sophisticated internal GPS system that occasionally likes to take you on scenic routes through emotional construction zones. Um, so your moon in Cancer forms some challenging aspects that basically keep you in the graduate school of how to care without completely depleting yourself 101. And
Yeah.
but meanwhile, your Scorpio sun is having beautiful conversations with your Pisces and your North Node. It's creating this lovely flow between I can handle anything and let me turn this into healing medicine for others. These aspects are like having internal coaches who sometimes disagree about the game plan, but ultimately want you to win the championship of life.
Right.
How do you experience the balance between being the person who can handle everyone's deepest stuff and being the person who still needs to function in daily life? Do you ever feel like you're running an emotional processing plant where raw trauma goes in one end and wisdom comes out the other?
Um, so I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, that kind of happens just because I've walked down some of these roads so often that I know the path really well. It's a well-worn path for me. So when people come in with specific things, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly how to go through that, right? Here's the ding, 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 right? But I think the deeper question you're asking is about my energy.
Yeah.
And so let me answer it at that level, which is um, so how do let me language this because I haven't languaged this before. Give me a second.
Take your time.
So I hold an energetic container for my clients. And the minute a client comes on board with me, they get a little sign in the front yard that says, this person is protected by Kelle, mess with them at your risk, right? So they're under my protection. And then I teach them how to protect themselves, right? That's the first thing, because nobody should be dependent on somebody else for their own protection for very long, right? But I am connected into them. So like I can feel if one of my clients is off, right? I'll be like, I need to talk to so-and-so, and I'll just send them a message, right? That sort of thing. The energetic container of the program they're in is its own energy. It's its own morphic field with the gestalt that runs through it. The gestalt being the energy that moves through, right? And the energy of that gestalt is based in the program's content and the work that's been done in the group. And so that energy is solid. It's like you're stepping onto a train that takes you through the process when you step in the door of it, right? And so it's so funny because I run programs that are a year long, and students will say, oh my gosh, I haven't been in the content for a while, and I came back and it was exactly where I am. And I'm like, yes, that happens a lot because the gestalt of the program is running through your life, whether you do the materials or not, right? The materials make it easier. The gestalt is what you're buying into, right? And so the materials allow you to understand it, but the experience is happening because you opted into the energetics, right? And so that's not it's me, but it's not me. It's so I created the container and I created the flow of the movement, but the universe is providing the experience, right? It's not me. It's providing the experience. The universe is going, oh, they tapped into this. Yeah, we got you. And you just jump in, right? And so it's a partnership with the universe in that way. It's not me saying, oh, I task you to go do this. No, it's I set up this intention. I held this container. I created this movement. And then people opted in and added their energy into that mix and strengthened the movement, strengthened that train. And everybody who comes in adds to the strength of that train. So like I have a program I've been running for 7 years now. I have a couple of them, and they go a lot faster through that process today than they did when I first started because the energy wasn't built up yet, right? And so there's it's a balancing act, for them in the universe. So for the universe and the program balance each other automatically. I don't actually get involved in that. I just trust the universe is going to do its thing because they opted in, and therefore the universe is like, opt in complete. You have up leveled. Here's your next level of the game, right? It's just that's how that works. And so from that perspective, that's what happens. From an energetic perspective, for me, I'm not actually holding my clients' energies on a regular basis. They're in the container of the program, and I'm loosely connected so I can monitor, but I'm not holding their energy on a daily basis. So that's not as big of a deal. I tap in, I do the work, I tap out, right? And so from my side of things, it's not energetically or emotionally exhausting in that regard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I see that, and I look at your chart as a whole, and there are many, many layers, to your chart, or to what I call the mandala of the soul, is that, you've basically been handed a cosmic instruction manual for turning life's challenges into other people's greatest breakthroughs. It's like having a spiritual recycling center where where everyone's emotional garbage runs through it, um, and they become transformed, and somehow you create an infrastructure that facilitates a process that allows it to be turned into gold, um, it's a gold that moves people from pathology to process and from comfort to capacity, and it helps people heal. So it's not, I don't see you as a healer. I see you as a catalyst, in terms that you're proof that the universe has a really sophisticated sense of humor, um, and an excellent business plan, because every difficult thing you've experienced and you've spoken about says to me that this is a cosmic internship that's preparing you for the job you actually are here to do. So if you were to write a job description for your soul's work, what would it say, and would you actually apply for that job?
um, so I'm here to uplevel the planet. That's what I'm here for. And there
Is
are
this
about
the 100,000?
yeah, there are about 100,000 of us that are on the planet for that right now. But that's what I'm here for. It was so funny because in my childhood I was so sad I wasn't born in the time where I would have been 20 in the 60s, the late 60s. And now I'm like, oh, now I know why I chose this time to come here, right? Because I get it now. Um, and there's such a need. It's people think of upleveling the planet as upleveling the vibration of the planet, and that is not how I'm thinking of it, right? In my mind, the way that needs to be upleveled is we need to get people back into their own power. There have been so many structures put in place within culture and within government and within schools and within mindsets and patriarchy and all the stuff, right? Because patriarchy is disempowering to men and women, right? Because and the challenge has come in on a cultural scale that over the years, as women have stepped into the workforce starting in the 80s, late 70s, with the I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never let you forget you're a man, right? All of that.
Yeah.
With all of that, and women becoming the superwoman, right? Which happened in the 80s, where they do it all, which of course meant that they did it all, right? And then the men lost all of their role. Men have gotten more and more disheartened and disenfranchised because they don't hold a solid role in culture anymore. Women have come in and taken over the role of breadwinner and homemaker and mother, and the younger generations are starting to shift that now. But millennials and Gen X, no, we have no definition for what a man is supposed to be. And if man steps outside of the traditional role, then that's not okay in a lot of cases. But there's no actual traditional role still for them and all of that. So there's a lot of damage for men in this dynamic as well. And then all the disenfranchisement that women have experienced for the last 2,000 years or whatever, that too, plus all of the other pieces that are going on around race and gender orientation and LGBTQ and all of the stuff, right? We have been so us versus them in our mindsets. It's a duality problem. We are stuck in our duality, and what we need to do is step into the experiential level of experience, right? So where things go from being right, wrong, up, down, black, white, good, bad, whatever, to everything is an experience, and the context determines whether it is a positive or a negative experience for me, right? What can be a positive experience for me may be a negative experience for you. And we had the exact same experience standing next to each other, right? But it's different. That's the experiential level, right? It's like how we interpret it is how we experience it, right? And so understanding that your interpretation of your experience determines your experience, and being able to step into that dynamic where you hold your own power so you can keep yourself safe, so that you are responsible for your well-being at any given moment, and you're not handing over that responsibility to somebody else. Like in partnership, we are taught in the US and through all movies and everything, you take care of me and I take care of you. Well, what happens if your partner isn't available to take care of you? There's a problem, right? Now you're just not getting taken care of because you've abandoned yourself. That's not okay, right? So bringing people back into the fullness of their own power, bringing them into the level where they're standing in a level of experience and choosing their experience, choosing their response, choosing their interpretation of the events, choosing whether or not to participate, not because it's good or bad, but because it's good or bad for me, right? It's not a judgment, it's a discernment, and there's a difference. So when you bring people into that state of being, there's no need to do peacemaking, because people are communicating from their heart-centered self. They're being their authentic self, and they're standing in their truth, and they're saying, this is what I need. And other people are saying, oh, well, I don't need that and I don't want that, but I want you to have what you need. So let's figure out how to make that happen, right? But without stepping on my needs, right? And then it becomes a collaborative experience of life instead of a competitive experience of life. And we're stuck right now in duality, and we need to shift into experience and authenticity, right? And that's my role in the world.
Totally resonate.
Yes, I would apply for that job. I would absolutely apply for
Excellent.
that job.
Excellent job description. You're hired.
Thank you.
I can see how,
because I've been doing the work for years.
Well, I can see how, you're someone who is alchemizing your entire life and your entire life experience into medicine for others, which is a beautiful thing. I want to thank you so much for allowing me the privilege of looking into your chart, and for you showing vulnerability and being open to this experience and to this process. One of the things I forgot to do was introduce you. Yeah. And because I got so excited in looking at your chart, we just seemed to just dive into the conversation. So
well, our pre-conversation went like an hour and a half. You and I just like to talk. That's what it is. I have to say something before you get around to introducing me. I just have to say, I have had I don't even know how many readings for astrology before. I can't even tell you how many readings. It's been 50 years in the world of spirituality. I have countless readings, right? And I have never had somebody do what you're doing, which is being a psychic and an astrologer at the same time. And are you aware that you're doing that?
Not really, no.
Okay. You are absolutely being a psychic and astrologer. Like I said, I felt you in my energy field, right? That's what you're doing, is you are taking your psychic abilities and using the astrology to tap into the person's psyche, to be able to take what you see on the chart and translate it using their own energy field, to use words and concepts that are consistent with their lived experience and bring that into form. And that is why you have hit so many things and used so many words that were resonant with me in the moment, because you were pulling them straight out of my energy field to get to be able to speak directly to my soul. And I've never seen anybody do that before. It is a unique gift, and it is incredibly powerful. And so if anybody's listening, I did not expect to be giving a wholehearted endorsement, but that is exactly what I'm doing right now, because this was it was a unique and transformative experience for me. And I really want to say thank you to you for that, because I did not expect this when I got on the call today. And so it is, I am honored to have received this from you, and I am incredibly grateful. So thank you for that.
Gosh, I'm speechless. Thank you so much. I never even realized that's what was happening, because I've never thought of myself as psychic. Or I mean, I love language, and I love to try and bring in different concepts and to clothe it, in language that speaks directly to your soul, as you're saying. It's that I feel it's a co-creation of some kind.
And it is, because you're in my energy field when you're doing it.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for that endorsement. I feel very touched and moved and inspired by that, because it's one of those things where there are no sort of KPIs or benchmarks, and it's not that I'm looking for that, but it's just wonderful to have that reflection and to receive that reflection back from someone who's as um, advanced in your vocation, in your spirituality, as you are. Thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. And I just want to say one more thing, which is, if anybody's listening who is struggling to figure out how to language themselves for their business as a spiritual provider, I wish I had had you 20 years ago, because you said things in this reading that I knew at this point in my work, but would have killed to know 20 years ago. And it took me decades of hard work to figure out. And you just handed them to me in this reading. And if anybody is stuck trying to figure out how to say what their gifts are, how to say what they do, how to be able to translate their uniqueness into words, you are a master wordsmith and you have a master level ability to reach into and take the complexity and put it into simple terms, but with powerful impact. And that is marketing gold and focus gold. So, I will be personally putting this out to my mailing list and telling everybody, if they're looking for that, I'm sending them to you, because that was brilliant.
Thank you so much. Wow. It's hard to describe what I'm feeling at the moment, but it's a lot of tingling in my crown chakra.
Shamanism, you can't call yourself a shaman until you're acknowledged by another shaman. And effectively, that's the conversation we just had. So this was an initiation point for you. So I'm not surprised that you're having a hard time identifying the energetics. But yeah, I mean,
I'm okay with that, though.
But it's an acknowledgement that that the acknowledgement level is significant in any path.
Okay, so want to introduce yourself, and I'll put that at the
I was
top of
going
the
to say,
recording.
so I'm Kelle Sparta, and I'm a transformational shaman. And while he processes that, I'm going to tell you who I am and where you can find me. I run a podcast called Spirit Sherpa, and I've been running that for the last 7 years. So there's over 500 episodes where you can come and listen to me talk about magic, energy, and the spirit world, as well as personal growth and development. And I run a variety of different programs that take you from awakening through to enlightenment and beyond. And we work on a level of combining personal growth and energy work to create transformation in all of those programs. And that is the fastest path to evolution. And so that you can find at kellesparta.com, KELLE, Sparta.com. And you can find all my stuff there, including a quiz that you can take that tells you whether or not you're ready for your shadow work. And so it's what is my shadow work readiness quotient? And the quiz result will tell you exactly where you are in your journey and what the next step is. And so I invite you to do that, as well as the Boundaries for Empaths that I mentioned earlier is also there. And that's a free e-course that you can get that I want everybody who's an empath to download or to access. And it's not a download, it's an access. And because it'll change your life. So thank you so much for having me on the show.
And those are all on your website?
Yes.
Okay, because I'll put the links in the show notes. Do you have any parting words at all?
Oh. Be in the moment, because the moment is the only thing there is. You know, you can't change anything from focusing on the future, and you can't change anything in the past. Your power exists only in the now. And so stay here and you will be at your most powerful.
So well said. Kelle, thank you so, so much. This has been one of the most inspiring and uplifting and insightful conversations I've had to date. So thank you.
Thank you. This has been awesome.